Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's weekly stream. You've got at the moment 4 Rooks. Is that right? Have I counted right? 1, 2, 3, 4 Rooks, and a special guest this week, who is Roderick, one of our playtesters.
Hello. Very glad to be here indeed. Obviously, I'll talk a bit more later on, but just thanks very much for having me for that.
No problem at all. We're really happy to have you here. So today the format is going to be very similar to what we have done before. First up, you've got welcome to the Ship of Clerkels playtest update. I've pretty much done that already. And we will go straight over to Andy Law to give us a brief production update.
Hello all, this week it's going to be really short and simple because we're still in that middle period where everyone's playing and slowly but surely reporting back. From our side and the document, it's now beginning to get the first updates installed into it. We've had a lot of feedback in a variety of different forms, ranging from first impressions right the way through to what people are currently doing on the Discord channel. And as mentioned before, we have a lot of points that have arisen from that we'd like to install into the document. I won't go into any details regarding the things that we're doing, but I will say one thing that we have definitely decided upon, and that's that the Esmeralda is changing its name. There will be more on that later because there's a very strong reason for why both it had that name in the first place, and there's a car passing by. I don't know where that came from.
Sounds like a cow.
That was great. But yes, there's a lot of reasons for why it had the name that it had to begin with, and also why we're moving it on to a completely different name. So more on that later.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We don't have Mark with us today. We suspect he may still be recovering after the glorious news of Scotland's win over France that was very good news for Wales in the Six Nations. And so we will move straight on to Andy Leask, who's with us again this week, to have a chat about the feedback you've been sending in.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lindsay. So thank everybody for all of the forms you've been submitting into us, both the first impression forms, and we've started getting through now actual GM forms and player feedback forms as well. So we do appreciate that. So as you're reaching the end of your kind of playthroughs, if you could fill those forms in, that'd be appreciated. We have a few people not sure where to find them. We've got links posted in Discord, but if you can't find them there, just pop a message and myself or someone else on the community will point you to the right direction so you can fill those in. So I thought it might be fun to share some of the stats, particularly from some of the player ones, because we were asking them about their sort of favorite NPCs and things. And interestingly, albeit perhaps sadly, and I don't know if I need to preface this with a spoiler warning or not, we'll just assume that everybody here has read it already. But poor old Mimi, the halfling bride-to-be, is far and away the most popular NPC. 38.5% of the players who've responded, she's been their favorite NPC. Following up underneath that with 15.4% Serana and Sergeant Gulper, which is interesting. Serana, I'm not that surprised by. Mimi, I'm not that surprised by, but very surprised that Sergeant Gulper has made such an impression on the players. So that's good to know. Beyond that, all the other NPCs, it was just one person that was their favorite, so no one else kind of standing out there. It's also been interesting looking at favorite and least favorite plots that people have got. Thus far, there's no real trends there, which it is, I guess, nice for us because it means all the plots are landing with some people, not landing with other people. But we will keep an eye on that to see if there are any trends amongst the players. One last little thing in terms of players, if you're GM out there, all of the players who've returned forms thus far haven't actually visited the Discord server yet. And that's fine. They don't have to. There's absolutely no expectation for them to do that. But equally, they are more than welcome. And you don't, obviously, well, now you don't need to worry about spoilers because they've reached the end of the adventure anyway. But if you're listening and you're still playing it with your players, remember, if they come and are players, they don't get access to any of the sort of GM-only channels where people are discussing both just generally how to run it, but also how to implement the different systems. That's all locked behind sort of GM access. So your players can come along, see the more kind of open chat areas and kind of join the community. So do feel free to extend that invitation to them. But equally, if they'd rather not, that's absolutely fine. And the last thing for me is really just about multiple playthroughs. when we were designing the form, we did set it up so that to try and minimize paperwork for you, so you can like report on multiple playthroughs in that single form, even if it's in different systems. There's the scope to do that. However, having spoken to a few people, that they're finding it a little logistically to keep that like complex to keep that all in their head, particularly because they may have very specific different feedback from different playthroughs. So if it's easier for you to just submit multiple forms for each playthrough, that is also fine. Whichever is easiest for you. If you want to store it all up and just give us one big form that is a weighted tome full of feedback, or if you'd rather fire multiple versions in for each playthrough, that's fine. Whatever way you want to give us the feedback on the form, we will take it. So thank you again, and look forward to reading the rest of your feedback when it comes in.
Thank you very much. We heart Mimi. And now over to Graham for a community update. Oh, Graham's mic has not been working. Are you? His mic isn't connected. He is miming now. Excellent. Can you do this through the medium of dance?
Ole! So I presume the community is completely fine since Graham currently can't be heard. As he fiddles around with that, I suggest that we just say, yeah, communities are great, man. And move on.
Here we are. We have a
Hey,
Yes.
hey!
Hello. Okay. Yes. The community is indeed great. There's some great discussions going on there. Everybody's talking and throwing ideas around, and we're loving watching it. And even if we're not as vocal on it as we might like to have the time to be, but great community. Keep on doing that. And we've put out a request for moderators, as you know. I think we mentioned that last week, and thanks to everyone who got back to us. That's going to be very useful for the community to have parts of it running itself. And very good to see Roderick here. He's been very active on the community. There he is. He's over there, isn't he? And we're still continuously looking for more guests to come on, so you don't have to listen to all of us all the time.
Yeah, please come out of wallflower mode, everybody, because it's perfectly lovely.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I've heard that some people might want to come on, but maybe haven't reached out. So I might drop a few messages in the week to see if anyone's keen.
Awooga, warning!
Yeah. I mean, just think of us. This isn't just us talking about ourselves, although inevitably that happens. But community. It's think of this as your virtual games club, and come and say hello.
Indeed. We've lost Andy. If he comes back, I shall readmit him. Here he comes. Hello, you're back.
It's the episode of technical difficulties.
Yeah, Andy, Law, and my internet went completely out about 15-20 minutes before the stream, so we were slightly panicking, but we're back. So if we go anywhere, you'll know what to do.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Jazz hands. Excellent. Well, thank you very much to the Rooks for their updates this week. And now we moved on to, it didn't take my update. I had changed it to Captain Roderick and his Ship of Clerkels. But you've been demoted. You're just Roderick and his Ship of Clerkels.
That's quite funny enough. That's another one of my online screen names. I'm Captain Roderick on Daka Daka. So small. Well, obviously it's not all that original, is it? It's like a fairly good intersection there. Smashing. Yeah. No, thank you very much for having me. I mean, we've got a couple of things that we said we'd probably talk about, but I just want to say, first of all, it's absolute thrill being here, and it's nice to be able to wave at all the lovely people that I've met so far on Discord as well. And I think a few folks are on the chat just now, and we'll see us later as well. And eventually, one day, in about 12 and a half years at my current rate, I will be able to send a link to this YouTube video to my players as well, and they'll be able to actually see this, and I'll give my shout out to them just now. So, when you guys do see this, hello.
Look how much hair he's got, and just all the grey. It just isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
So I've got a few questions to ask you, and then I think you're going to talk a little bit about transferring between systems. But I just had a few questions about why did you want to get involved in the playtest in the first place?
Yeah, it was kind of a sort of perfect storm for me because although I've loved RPGs and ye olde Warhams since I was a youngin, about 12, 13. As I've already said, actually, on the stream, I was partly inspired by some of Mark's art to end up here today when I was 13, I think. So I've always had overlapping interests, but then I just starting to kind of internet stalk some of you a little bit when you started setting up the Rookery. So that was like a perfect moment for me to go, oh, right, okay, I'm going to just try and get involved in this because I know I'm going to love everything they do. And obviously you did some fantastic teasing as well of what could it be? And here's a load of birds on the internet. What could it mean? And all of that tickled my fancy a great deal. So whatever you were planning on doing, I just thought, let's go for it entirely. It's going to be a nice creative opportunity. It's been a pish year. Let's do something really fun and nice and creative and find out what fun stuff these folks are up to.
We are very happy you did get involved. So what were your first impressions about this particular module adventure story?
Well, obviously, none of us, you were very, very good at keeping hush-hush. Andrew Leask was incredibly good at teasing the pants off us using spoilers as well. So we knew nothing at all about what we were going to run into. So my first impression was like, okay, this is wonderful. It's big document, 60-odd pages, isn't it? So I've never run a module that size before. I've never done one of Graham's past adventures, like the classic Rough Nights and Hard Days, with so many moving parts. So initially I was kind of like, this is quite daunting. But also the thing that immediately struck me is the humor. And that was the thing that really leapt out at me, is this is so much funnier and more fun. And my players have noticed it as well, than anything that I've run in the past, to be honest. I'm not one of these like hyper grimdark type people who thinks it's got to be incredibly serious, but this is like another level, like all your celebrity chefs and
we just can't help ourselves.
Yeah, but it's smashing. Like every single session I've done so far, my players have been giggling whenever I introduce a new NPC because of who it is. They just love it. They love every moment.
Brilliant. That is good to hear. And hopefully as we develop the world, we'll be able to demonstrate kind of the juxtaposition between the fun and also the more grim, because we've got a quite a strong opinion amongst ourselves, don't we, guys, that you can't really have grim dark all the time. And actually it's more powerful when it is juxtaposed against those funny moments and those human moments. Before we talk about some of the challenges in scaling combat, which is something we're going to talk about, I just wanted to check, what stage are you at in the adventure just now?
I am at 9:30. So last session, my players, one of them lost a resilience point, for those of you who like your Woofer Up, to a surprise attack from the eel, because they chose, not the eel, the sluffish, because they chose to open the barrel themselves as opposed to letting some NPCs go off and do it. So therefore, surprise attack from a Reich eel, how I did it mathematically, almost killed someone straight away. So after they eventually dealt with that using the whole party, Constantine is bleeding now. It's quite funny actually, because one of my players did some really nice role playing, got to know Father Torl, did amazingly well on a charm test after giving him some free booze, and then also was really chummy with Constantine. And then within the space of 15 minutes, Constantine got stabbed and Torl got thrown over the edge. Took it quite personally.
How unfortunate.
Yeah.
So one of the things we talked about when we were chatting about you coming on was the challenge of scaling combat difficulty, not just between systems, but also for different levels of parties, because usually an adventure is written with a certain level in mind, and maybe it scales up, but you don't always bring in your adventurers at the right time. So I thought it would be great to have a chat with you about that, and just really to hear your thoughts to begin with, before I'm sure the others who are more system-minded than I will probably chip in.
Let me just butt in just for a second before. There's a reason that this particular conversation came up, because Roderick, during the course of his Discord conversations, deployed the Clerkel. And the Clerkel is directly related to this topic. I shan't discuss the Clerkel, because I shall leave that to Roderick to do in his own words. But it's worth saying that the Clerkel is directly not just impacted, but talks to this particular issue, and dances around a bunch of concepts that we had discussed behind the scenes when we were pitching how to cover combat in general. So I shall now move over to Roderick, having cleanly discussed the Clerkel.
I love the
Clerkel
fact
away.
you are appropriately giving it the same weight as when people talk about the Higgs boson, which is entirely accurate. So I just want to say, first of all, that I'm actually really looking forward to this as well, because you guys haven't given that much away about your behind the scenes thoughts. So I'm hoping some of that's going to come out in this. Essentially, it was just that when I started reading your system, I initially was a little bit thrown, because you're looking at an entirely new system. I know a lot of other folks as well have looked at it and kind of gone, oh, hang on, how do I, because they're all used to what they're used to, they're used to their own way of doing things, and it's a new way of looking at things. And then something in my head clicked, and what I realized would be a good way to express the system would be in terms of, because I've got a science communication background, I thought about it in terms of like standard units almost. So you've got a standard unit of effectiveness, or a standard unit of difficulty, or basically a standard person, which then, because I don't think I was sleep deprived at the time, I might have been a wee bit tipsy, but it just morphed horribly out of, one of these things, morphed horribly out of shape. So it became the standard unit, and I'd been following Medieval Deathbot on Twitter, which sadly has now been discontinued, and apparently like 40% of deaths in the medieval era were clerks. So I then came up with a clerk who was the perfect average person, who was therefore a fixed point that you could build the rest of your system on. So just in the same way as when we're discussing force, we talk about it in terms of newtons. When we're discussing mass, we talk about kilograms. When we talk about difficulty or strength of NPCs or effectiveness of NPCs, you measure them in Clerkels. And then I then got even more carried away when you were about to do your first stream and decided to write a short story about about Dr. Crow hacking apart the remnants of poor, unfortunate, disgusting, murderous Clerkel. And and actually, I've actually not run the furthest with it. I think someone of the guys watching just now, John Pick, has gone even further and started using Clerkel as a kind of Kenny from South Park-esque NPC. So it's already mutated way beyond my limits. So that was the core thing, and I'd love to hear what you all thought about it and how that actually does, whether it does work for you, how it fits in. Because actually, one thing I did want to say quickly is the important thing in my mind about Clerkel is not necessarily where Clerkel fits in the rookery system. It's how people use Clerkel to take the rookery system and attach it to their own game system. It's where you choose to attach it, and I started using the unfortunate word where you peg it. So Clerkel gets pegged to someone else's game system. Love that look on Andy Leask's face.
Oh my!
Exactly. Based on exactly essentially the GM decides you can attach it to a generic peasant from your world and say that's a Clerkel and everybody is this much stronger or weaker than that person, or you attach it to the party if you choose you want to scale difficulties around their current strength level, so you just base it on the weakest person in the party. That was all my theory, and now we're going to find out the truth, hopefully.
I have two comments that I'm going to bring. There's an awful lot more I can say, but I shall give space to everybody else to talk as well. I'm not going to bring any particular opinions or any direct views as to what I think. Instead, what I'll do is I'll explain very briefly two things that we looked at as we were building parts of our system and what our system did that those systems didn't. And the two I'll quickly alight on are in D&D, you've got your threat ratings, your threat levels, how powerful the various monsters are. And that's all designed there to give you, hopefully, a tool to balance your encounters. It does create a whole variety of oddities in that there's certain creatures you just can't kill. When you reach a certain level, there's certain creatures that no longer pose much of a threat. And sometimes those creatures can be exceedingly fearsome in terms of their description or their appearance, because they're, I don't know, a big giant creature, but its threat rating's all the way down at helping a party at, say, level 3, attacking a party at level 3, pardon me. And then something comes along that's got a threat rating that's designed to attack a party at level 10, but you look at it and go, but it looks measly by comparison to this monster. So the scalability and how they work there in D&D's version was most certainly something we looked at. But another thing as well was Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2 and its beastry. It had what I could argue was a clerkel. It had a veteran soldier that it used to pitch a threat rating towards all the various monsters. And they said, what is the threat of this creature in terms of its attempt to take out this soldier, ranging from 1 to 5, as I recall. It didn't work. Much like D&D's one doesn't work frightfully well either. It's all a bit abstract. And when we were looking at it, and we realized we were creating something that was generic, the one thing that we did was ignored that. Instead, we pitched the core difficulty at the party, which meant that we could always state how much a particular scenario was meant to threaten your PCs as a group. So we could say this is really very supposed to be fearsome. So whatever your group is, make something that's fearsome for it, using this as a guideline, meaning that we were no longer attached to a particular set of stats. And from the perspective of adventure design, I found that exceedingly freeing. Because if I, for example, was writing...
If I could just say, people love it, by the way. That's one of the things I've seen come up again and again in Discord. People love that encounter challenge difficulty thing.
Yeah, and I think for writers, if you don't do that, then it's very hard to shape the tension of the adventure and the narrative structure of the adventure. So that's where the power of that approach comes for the writing team, I think. I don't know if, Graham, you have a thought.
I've just got one point left.
So,
one point left to finish on, because almost there.
Almost there.
Almost there. Let's see. Let me go and I'll just go, which is why I kept myself to just 2 points. It's exceedingly freeing as a writer, because it meant that we could no longer, if, for example, I was writing a Warhammer adventure, which is what I'd most recently been doing beforehand, if I statted something in that, it immediately becomes too powerful for some parties and not powerful enough for others. Where we were no longer in that position. We were in a position where we could say, this is hard, this is easy, this is so-so. And that's the last point I want to make.
Yeah, and you're right. I too have 2 points to make, and
good luck.
One is that kind of an extension of what Andy was just saying was that, in addition to being system agnostic, we wanted to make things as much level agnostic as we could. We wanted to remove every possible barrier that says your party can't use this for whatever reason. The game, the level, whatever. And that was another way to do that. And I will observe that the very first issue of White Dwarf back in 1976 had the first part of an article called The Monster Mark System by Don Turnbull. He ended up running TSR UK for a while and editing the Fiend Folio. But he was a maths teacher at the time. And he attempted to derive a numerical system for, doing exactly like the slaughter margin in Wolfrock 2, like the... that was one of Halliwell's favorite puns back in the day, from the water margin, that Chinese TV show that you may or may not remember. The current challenge rating in D&D. I've never seen a system like that actually works. This is a discussion we've had among ourselves. I like using adjectives because if you use numbers, you have a chance. Numbers are a hard thing. They're an inflexible thing, and they have more chance of not working for somebody. Whereas you use adjectives, you know, people can derive the numbers that they need that work for not only for their system but also for their party.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
there's a comment on Discord just now from Leatherbelt saying that they'll have to see how it goes in with RIP, but D&D has been good for the 2 wildly different leveled games that they have played with it so far.
Good.
Yeah.
Good to hear.
And I'm not really like, if we let Andy Law go off on systems, we could honestly, I mean, we could speak for hours.
We could be here till Christmas. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what a lot of our walks are, him talking about a system problem that he has, and me like listening and occasionally interjecting to provide a key insight, I would say, key and crucial insight probably. But Andy Leask, you've had the same experience. You and the 2 Andys bounce system ideas off each other. So you know, what are your thoughts about Clerkel and the?
No, I mean, I think Andy and Graham have said quite a lot of it already. But you know, the key thing is, because it's not just about level. Particularly, obviously, most of our experiences in the kind of Warhammer sort of playground, and within there, it's not just about level and XP. It's also about the careers that you've followed, and it's possible to have a very experienced party of, you know, scholars and scribes and lawyers. It's also possible to have a relatively low level party with a single dwarf troll slayer who is able to kind of munch through just about anything you throw at them. And that just further reinforced what Andy was saying, like the futility of trying to pin actual stats on it, because you can't, you know, you go in any Discord where people are talking about Warhammer and people will either be complaining that their party were slaughtered and TPK'd by something, or they'll be complaining that their party absolutely wiped through it and it wasn't any kind of threat at all. And I think the reality, what I've seen, obviously most of my gaming experience has been as a player rather than as a GM, but through both, you know, Ratcatchers Guild and on our sort of Discord server, and just chatting to people on Twitter as well, talking to a lot of GMs, like what seems to be the case is that very few GMs actually do now run things straight out the box. They always tinker a little bit anyway. So that was very much our kind of design goal, was to make it easily kind of adjustable, to essentially, rather than attempt to give something which then has to be taken apart and reconstructed, to give something that is just essentially a really straightforward springboard for GMs to kind of use to kind of tailor to what they need. And as a writer, it is enormously liberating. Like that point you said, Lindsay, about tension, like it lets you control the ebb and flow. It lets you know that this is just meant to be a fun little encounter just to kind of warm the party up, or this is something big and climactic. What it also lets you do a little bit, and this is going to make me sound really Machiavellian and sinister, but it does let you kind of influence and nudge what parties like might and might not do. Like you deliberately want it to have the freedom, right? You know, we're not writing a novel here. We're writing a series of adventures that we intend to go perhaps a certain way, but we also build in scope for it to go lots of different ways. Yeah. That being said, you know, we might want to discourage excessive murder hoboing, for instance, particularly because, as you will see without giving away any spoilers, but we're building towards more kind of urban adventures. So, you know, in there, it's really problematic if parties just run around murdering people all the time. That doesn't make for a realistic kind of city-based play. But there will be some parties that will want to do that. So we need to allow scope for that, but we also perhaps need to say, well, if they do that, all these reinforcements are going to turn up and it's going to be very, very hard for them to survive. And that does just then lend the world a little bit more weight, a little bit more believability. There are consequences for the party's actions. And that's something, again, that from a narrative perspective is one of the key things Andy and I looked at when we were first talking about the campaign name has been revealed, hasn't it?
Yes. Somewhere.
Yes, when we were first talking about the Cold Crown.
Yes.
I thought I was about to say something I shouldn't have. When we first started sketching out the kind of the arc for the Cold Crown, we wanted consequences to be really, really important. That there was loads of scope for doing lots of different things, going different ways, but it needed to have consequences. So.
I'll reinforce what Andy was saying just on the quick point of consequences, because I'll bring out one point, just one. Murder hoboing. That is a constant fear for the scenario writer for trying to build a realistic setting, but it's also something that has to be taken into account. And I don't just mean putting up barriers for it, but also accepting it's going to occur and ensuring that there are repercussions and that the game can keep going, which is super important. And part and parcel of the longer overarching plot is allowing situations to occur where these sort of characters can move through, do the things that they do, and still allow the adventure to continue.
And I wondered, Roderick, so what Andy Leask was saying there about very few DMs take stuff and run it out the box. What is that your experience? Are you
the first time I used anything out of the box was very recently, actually. I've always been homebrew, so I just tend to sort of come up with my own story and then kind of run with it. And it's been a joy to actually kind of chill out a little bit because I've got 2 Wolfrock campaigns on the go. So like on my side hustle, I'm like, oh, just do something somebody else has written for once. Actually, that'd be great. But even then, you've got to make some adjustments. The thing I find I adjust most, funnily enough, is combats, because to me, the point in doing an RPG is not how well mechanically does your set of stats on that paper do against this set of stats on this paper. It's how much fun are my players having. So many times I will just be like, yeah, I think you've definitely earned the death of this big bad monster here. I probably won't pull out their 3rd Naga attack or whatever it's called in Final Fantasy, I'm not sure. I don't tend to kind of go in that sort of a route. So it is very much about always making adjustments, more on the fly, I'd say. But especially with this, I have been trying to stay relatively true to it. But it's really interesting that I just want to jump back on what you were talking about, because you've got both the numerical values at the back of the book and then you've got the adjectives in the middle of the book. So you're testing both of them simultaneously. Everybody loves the adjectives. And the point in Clerkel to me was to make the numerical values more accessible, was all. Because any GM can say, right, in my universe, Clerkel is this strong. And for this party, Clerkel is this strong. And then I build the strength of all the rest of them on it. But I do wonder how you'd get on if you just literally ditched all the numbers at the back and just put in adjectives instead, or even just had a scale that was vaguely numeric, but was all in terms of words.
I mean, we certainly... Sorry, I was just going to say we certainly moved away, and it was a light bulb moment when we were like, well, what do we do about elves? And we moved away from actual heights. It also solves the issue of metric versus imperial versus, I don't know, what other systems are used. And that was a light bulb moment to say, well, we can just use an adjective there. So they're tall for their species, or they're, short for their species, whatever in your world their species happen to be. I wonder, Andy Long, what are your thoughts on taking away numbers entirely?
I am a strong advocate of numbers, and also a strong advocate of the opposite side too. And that's because I'm a strong advocate of ensuring that what we create is as useful as possible to as many different groups as possible. Some groups will thrive on having every difficulty and every test very carefully laid out for them and marked in the text, and they won't know what to do without them. Similarly, some groups will just throw those out the window, and they will be wanting to focus directly on what the narrative focus behind it is. Every GM is different, and I find that because I generally sit in the overarching trying to make sure that everybody's ideas are included as best they can be. I tend to try and ensure that there is a balance in everything that we're producing, because we all have different, personally, between us all, different views as to what will work the best as a final product. And that is, I think, a deep strength for us. And as we move out and we start gathering everyone else's opinions and dragging those in as well, hopefully what we do will ping off different people for different reasons. And so far, I think it has. It's been very interesting for me personally to see how, for example, the tests have been received. That was, for me, one of my biggest concerns, because there's so many tests marked directly into the text, and whether it would be easy to both understand and whether it would be used, or whether people would just go, nah, this is just not appropriate for my game. And if that's the case, then it's wasted space from our perspective. We'd be better just saying, do some random generic thing in this particular area, or they have to get through this lock, worry about it yourselves. But as it turns out so far, people love both sides. They love having the freedom of the more broad combat-y, it's easy, it's hard, but they also like having some quite fixed numerical, this is meant to be this hard, this is meant to be easier here with particular numbers attached. So I sit in the middle. while simultaneously fighting all corners.
I think it depends on the medium of your book as well, right? So in a PDF, you've got much more scope to have multiple options, but when you print something, you have to make real, quite difficult decisions about what goes in that, because you can't print a book that's 500 pages long, when it's just a short adventure to cover every single option.
Yeah, I think the way you've done it's bang on in terms of inline is adjectives, and therefore when you're flicking through it, if you haven't prepared all your NPCs properly in advance, you can wing every single combat by just how hard have they tried? I'll just go with it. And then you've got this, as you say, for the folks who love their crunch, you have a lovely big appendix at the back full of loads of numbers, so everybody relates that way. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's also nice from a world building perspective. What that does let us do is establish like a hierarchy between the NPCs, so that there is some objective sense of relative power as well, which is not necessarily as easy to convey if it's just talking about the kind of combat. So,
and I'll also say that the characters will have specific systematic use later as well. We are building towards stuff, yeah, that's all I'm going to say so far.
Ruthless tease.
As ever, if anyone has any questions, just pop them in the comments in the chat.
Comments wherever they are.
Yeah, I don't know where they appear.
Neither do I.
And even if they did, I always point the wrong way.
One of those ways.
Right. That way, I think.
Yeah.
I wonder, is there anything, Roderick, that's particularly surprised you about what we've done and what you've discovered so far?
Well, I didn't really know what I was getting into at all. I mean, as Andy Law knows, I literally leapt straight on the Discord as soon as I found the link. I was the first through the door. I just sort of leapt before I looked so it's all just been a wonderful, pleasant experience. And I think one of the things that's really nice and is very evident is actually that you're all doing this because you want it and because you're going to enjoy it. And that really does come through as well, I think, is that this is trying to do something good for fun as opposed to for deadlines. And yeah, it is really coming through. And like I said before, the humor, but that is, to me, is so utterly key in it, because, I've chatted to all of you a little bit about your past interests and what RPGs you've done and all those things. You all know how to do horror real good. Like, you've all done the murderous side of it really well. And I think what's really refreshing about it is the humorous side of it. Yeah, just having that charm coming through.
Well, as I've said before, at every possible opportunity, the humor and the horror you need both, because one without the other is just one-dimensional, and they throw each other into relief. And if Mimi weren't so charming, then what happens to Mimi wouldn't be so horrific.
I forgot to say, actually, one of the other things that has happened in my game so far is one of my players just went way over Mimi's comfort level and was like naked by 9 a.m. Just like, the whole change your clothes inside out bit.
Yeah.
You just stripped.
Right.
Not personally, but you sort of erected a little barrier of armor to get like naked behind.
So we do have a question. Sounds like this might be something still under wraps, but does the specific systematic use imply the stat blocks could be used for such a specific system or for any other system?
It's designed to be used by every system, regardless of what you're using. You'll find that as we progress onwards, that there's going to be this loose concept behind things, this loose concept of blocks that sit behind everything we're doing. So a block of rules that can be attached, or a block that can be added to your game, or anything similar, which can be dropped on top of any game, in the same way that a scenario can be dropped on any game as long as it's specifically pitched to be system agnostic. There are going to be some things that we add on top, like, for example, a very simple one. You play a game of cards, and here's some rules for those cards and how they work. So here's a quick mini game for how that cards work. We will be building other similar things for pretty much every thing that we add to the story going forwards, saying almost nothing about it specifically. So the answer to that is yes. Yeah, that's going to be useful.
I love the NPCs and their stats description. Excellent. Thank you. We like a compliment.
Yeah.
We
I
do.
second that as well. Actually, just that the thing that sort of really leaps out is when you get to that section. You read through the whole adventure, and then you get to the NPCs, and you're like, "Oh, I never knew that." And you get the gossipy stuff about like their little secrets and so on. I think that is a real hook. That's like I've heard people ranting about that as well, as just how much they love the flavor that comes through there so quickly.
Good.
That's again specifically designed from. I'm going to go back and ping out something that came from Freeport when we were discussing bits and pieces about Freeporty bits when all the text came through, and I was doing the map, which is up there for Freeport. They put forward the very simple and obvious location adventure hooks. When we moved into Warhammer, picked that up and ran with it, and ensured that everything that we added to the game could be used. So there was always adventure hooks, but we took it slightly further and we dropped out all the secrets from the main locations and dropped them into the adventure hooks so that we could get a lot more depth into the core text itself. The secrets were inside the hooks while the core material dealt with the locations. And we've to a degree run with that with everything that we're presenting here, where the NPCs are not just a stat block, they are walking, talking adventure hooks, so that when you use them, and if they're successful in your game, you can then go at the end, assuming they survive, I like this one, who are they? How can I use them again? And you've hopefully got more than enough tools at your disposal to go, well, clearly they have an issue here, or they've got a background over here. I can use that and wrap that into my games using this route or that route. So it's all about trying to ensure that everything isn't just there to be easily used, but also creates and promotes you creating your own stories and plots in your adventures. At least that was the hope.
Yeah, we're all about creating toolkits. Yes, this will give you a story. I like to use the analogy of Legos. They come in a set that builds a certain thing, but you can make all kinds of stuff out of the bits. And if you've got several sets, then you can make all kinds of weird stuff out of the combined bits.
I think Lego's perfect. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good one.
Here is a good question. If someone knows the answer, tell me so I can cleanse the channel of the bots like the Inquisitor that I am.
Have we got bots all over the place, do we?
Yeah.
Oh, look at that. Oh, yes, we do. Oh, bots have already arrived. The crow bots have arrived. They're taking over.
I wonder, so Andy, at least you talked about the favourite character coming through in the feedback. I wonder what everyone on the stream, so we'll maybe start with Roderick. See what your favourite character was.
I think that's really. It is really hard.
I just sprung that on you all.
Yeah. Because the thing is, I spent so much time with like doing all the tokens and everything as well. So I've kind of like, it's hard because some of them you kind of develop without that much detail, and then they start being beloved to the characters. Nal has gone down, has made people quite amused very rapidly. Bollo, though, I actually think Bollo, because of the impact he's had, he's been like Jupiter. Like the gravitational effect he's had on my players has been superb. Like he looks out of a door and they just kind of whoa backing away from him because it just deliberately put him across as being horrendously intimidating. So that's yeah, he's had the biggest impact so far. But I mean, ask me again in like 6 weeks when I finally finish the adventure.
Here's one. If one of the characters you've suggested needs to stay alive in this adventure meets an accident via the PCs, this sounds like our gaming group, will it be easy to replace them in a later adventure, as my players can be special? We're very special players, aren't we, Andy Law?
You are.
Me and Andy Leask, yeah.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
We really are.
Yeah. So, what do you think? I know that you thought, I think you have thought about this to a certain extent and tried to signpost those characters.
Yeah, we tried both to signpost those, but also in some of the other products that are written, but you guys haven't seen yet. Like we expressly call out what to do if said character isn't available anymore, and some kind of various suggestions for things you can do with that. It's going to be an increasingly complicated logistical thing for us to keep track of as we go through the Coiled Crown, in terms of we might have planned NPCs to go the whole way through, but they might have died all the way back then. Yeah. But again, I think the nature of the way in which we're presenting things as tools, we're presenting things as options, and we're trying, and I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, we're trying very explicitly to have an actual dialogue in the text with the GMs. So it's not just here's a thing. It's here's a thing, you might want to do it this way, and actually talking about what the impact is of those things. We're hopefully giving GMs the tools they need to replace that relatively easily. And one of the sort of models in the back of my mind is to think about the like the kind of BioWare games when you play the sort of sequels to those, where you kind of almost go through the, you know, like what's your game state like, and keeping that in mind in our future products, in terms of at the beginning having GM saying, well, okay, these are the characters you're going to need in this adventure. You might have killed this guy off, in which case prepare for somebody to kind of come in instead. So
because you can't, I mean, you can signpost an NPC and say he's going to be important later on, and to some players that's going to be a red rag to a bull. They're just going to want to kill him just to see what that does. And you know, so then the GM's faced with this dilemma, you know, do you come up with some improbable means to keep him alive, which just makes the players even more determined, or do you actually provide some alternatives to keep everything on track? And we're you know, as Andy said about other things, we're trying to cover all eventualities.
I've faced this directly, so I have a little thing to add to it. I had a player called Steve who was very, very aware of the background of the game we were playing, which was Vampire. And much like Graham mentioned, the old bull and red waving, whenever a named NPC from the established setting sat, he had one desire, and that was to kill it. Because he was aware,
perhaps more precisely, to diablerize it.
Exactly, because he was aware that it almost certainly had implications later, and it just made him smile, because he was that guy. And part of the process of building a campaign is allowing for that to take place. And I think Andy nails it with his game statement there, ensuring that there is a nice, easy, simple summary of, this is the NPCs that are used in this adventure. It's possible you don't have some of those available. This is what to do instead. So to use his Mass Effect analogy, if you have killed this character who is the king of his people, then there's a new king who looks very similar and does similar things. But that was the way they fixed it, because they were doing a computer game. We can do something completely different because we have far more free will with a GM there to fix and patch up all the holes in a way that you can't do with computer programming, because tabletop roleplay has advantages.
There's a comment there that's, I think, probably, it's not a question, but useful feedback. I did wonder about Nal, Serana, and the crew. Nal seems weak with regard to the Ship of Fools adventure. Serana feels like a shoe into the adventure and is as though it's a setup for a later adventure.
Hilariously isn't.
Or is it?
Or
that's
is it now?
almost the one plot that is least a setup for a future adventure.
But having said that, though, through the course of the writing, they have now become characters that we intend to use later should they be alive, but they were never part of the written overarching arc that we had for the Coiled Crown to begin with, but through the course of writing, and obviously we grow attached to characters too, and when they come out of the adventure alive and they're in particular places, we can then use them ourselves and pop them in. But yeah, that's funny.
And this one, sorry, Graham, on you go.
Sometimes it happens, you know. It's happened to me in the course of running an adventure. It's happening to us now because of all your feedback in the course of creating the adventure, is that sometimes the adventure tells you it wants to go this way. And when that happens, it's wise to just go with it, or at least to allow the possibility.
So I enjoyed bringing Mimi to life, but it was Tranter that has surprised me as things have progressed in my game. I think Tranter is one of my favorites too.
I didn't answer the whole favorite thing, did I? Tranter stands out as one of my favorites, which is why I specifically, if you look at the what happens to Tranter afterwards, really went grim.
I know. I was so sad.
I really dialed that one up to 11 as to what happens to poor old innocent Tranter. That's a nasty one. I also quite like Tranter, so hands up for me.
Yep, here's one. I wouldn't tell my players which NPCs were importantly drawn. My players really liked the Linsoms and were heartbroken when they learned that the Bake Off is not part of this adventure. And also, Someone else agrees. Their players felt the same. Didn't realize they wanted a fantasy bake-off adventure.
Who knew?
Who knew?
It's coming next, though, isn't it? I mean, no spoilers, but that's what the entire campaign's about. Coiled Crown. That's the prize for the bake-off competition. Yeah.
Yeah, no, like it's a type of bread. Like
Yeah,
you have
it
to
is,
like
yes.
coil it and
Yeah,
plait
yeah.
it. Yeah, it's highly
A
intricate.
coiled. Oh, you really could as well.
You're good at that,
Yeah, it's coming. It's a major feature of the next part, and it's one of those things we don't want to just drop stories in a fashion that Ship of Fools Hustook is the first part. When you're doing your first part, you're going to have some characters that look like they're almost sidelines. You're going to have some stories that looks like they're set up for other things, because they are. We tried very hard to make Ship of Fools look individual, but simultaneously, some of the characters were, like Father Torrell, for example, a setup. But paying off those setups is what's important, I reckon.
Yeah, and what might be, again, I won't go into details, but what might be interesting for people to know is that actually what Rides Beneath, which comes after, was the initial draft of that was actually written before Ship of Fools.
Right.
So what we almost did was took some characters that we used later and actually dialed their story back a bit to kind of include them in that.
Yeah.
So and that has then had a knock-on effect now on what Rides Beneath, as we're now sort of changing that because the stories evolve and and Andy's the one who has to install those changes.
Yay!
Yeah. And going back to the plots and things that look like they're going somewhere, people are going to be disappointed if they're not. But also, you can get an awful lot out of bringing something in that people thought was a throwaway, and then have that come to something.
Absolutely.
I kind of feel like Nal and Saran is a bit like that because it seems very low key. It's there's no fielding. Like he's not a threat. There's nothing bad going to happen there whatsoever. He's just going to flop around, being a bit weird, and oh god, no.
Yep.
He's got a hole in his chest.
Here's another
anti-Superman.
Here's another comment with regards to the crew. I think there could have been a lot more impact connection with the crew aside from, I don't know how to say speak. Is it speak?
Yeah, I speak. I think it's a town outside Liverpool. I just chose the name semi-randomly because of Captain speaking from Airplane.
Okay, speak and Tranter. There are loads of options for the crew interaction with the PCs during the course of the adventure.
Agreed.
There are, but you can't. If you try and set them all out, number one, it's an infinite amount of work, and you'll never get the thing out the door. and number two, you're leaving nothing for the GM and the party to do. You're putting the thing more increasingly on rails. So at some point, it's a value judgment. It's a design decision that you leave this as something to be filled out by when you're playing it.
It also gives the GMs more to do because I have
That's
loved creating my love triangle amongst the second, third, and fourth officers by using the main cast of the Hornblower TV movies.
Nice.
So that's just started to fester. Bush spotted the other two standing a bit too close together, and he's going to call a duel quite soon.
Lovely.
So that's been my own little. That's the one thing I have added.
Yeah, and I suppose it also allows you to potentially, obviously, there's the scope here for people to have used like a pre-existing boat or to kind of weave this into a pre-existing campaign. So it allows you to bring in pre-existing NPCs that you already either have already used or are planning to use elsewhere.
Yeah, and someone said the same thing. They found having a blank slate for the crew officers allowed them to tweak them to my group.
Yeah, that was, I think, the intent. Graham, when he did the first draft, left them mostly blank, and I didn't add there. Because I agreed with Graham. He did it right. It's good to allow the GM to have some space and scope to add their own influence into the adventure. And the crew is a beautiful place to do that because there's so many of them.
Right. And, in a way, it's sort of another facet of what we were talking about with numbers versus adjectives. It's that giving people what they need, but also giving them the space to do for themselves whatever works for their game.
Yeah, agreed.
I don't think we've got any more questions. I just put that one up on the screen. For me, very few plans for my first contact with the party, so I don't overthink things too much ahead of time.
I mean, that's possibly my favorite thing about role playing. Like, I mean, I love all aspects of role playing, but possibly my favorite thing is the look on Andy's face when we do something really stupid that he hadn't planned for. It's just.
And
we're like, we've derailed it again.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things as a GM, you know, as opposed to just presenting something like I'm a narrator reading from a book, but then, oh God, now how do I get out of this? Oh, you bunch of so and so's, how am I going to? Okay, and then that challenge, that's my gameplay, that's my fun.
Yeah, indeed, that's part of the fun that I have as well as a GM. I enjoy to go sort of artsy fartsy on it, the improvisational theatre of it all. Whose line is it anyway version of how the adventure turns out.
Exactly.
Suddenly you've got to invite a whole bunch of random people to a party you never planned, and you've got to suddenly ping out all these characters to fill up all the holes, and they all have to have names, and they all have to have character, they all have to be individuals, and the PCs are sitting there going, this was all planned, wasn't it? Yeah.
And you have to make it look like it was, even if you've made it up at a second's notice.
That's just really interesting, Andy. Just on that, I've never really thought about that before. But because I mean, it is essentially improv theatre that we're all kind of doing.
Well, that's how I got introduced to role playing. Was I was in a Amdram group, and some guy said there was this thing that was part improvised theatre and part miniatures wargaming, and I was like, what?
Perfect intersection of I think that's probably a very good way of explaining it to new players. That whole kind of yes and philosophy, because what often happens with newer players is they maybe try and shut things down and just play their character the way they've always played their character, and resistant to kind of embracing those opportunities, and perhaps using that kind of yes and philosophy from improv to encourage people to maybe go with the flow a bit might be.
Yeah, I used to describe LARPing to people when I was telling the story of how Andy and I met as improvisational theatre, because people seemed to get that. But actually, for me, role playing, the first time I encountered it in my life would have been literally at primary school, where me and my friends took on the roles of Han Solo, Luke Skywalker. I was obviously Princess Leia because I went to a tiny village school and I was the only girl, so it was fine. And we just started where the character started and just played all playtime as those characters. So it's quite natural for young children to do role playing, and then as we get older, we get this system and structure around it, which I find it's fascinating.
And that's how I explain it to a lot of people, is it's like those games, cops and robbers, cowboys and whatever. But you've got some rules for those moments where someone says, bang, you're dead, and the other one says, no, I'm not, you miss me.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So a question, are we going to hear about the boat renaming in this stream, or do we need to keep wondering all week?
Keep wondering. There's a reason for that, and I'll explain the reason, so I'm not just being arbitrary. The name isn't nailed down. We reckon we've got the name, but through the course of updating the document and going through everything, we might find
evergreen, isn't it? It's got to be evergreen. It's a Ship of Fools. It's evergreen.
oh! I've got to add that to my notes. I've got to make some sort of pun or joke.
I'll make a note.
So I can't believe that did not occur to me. Thanks for that.
That exact second.
Through the course of doing all of the changes, something else might get developed and something else might run on, and we might add a little bit of an embellishment to the name that we currently think. But as it currently stands, we reckon we've nailed it. I'm about 99% positive. But there's no point in declaring it and then having to redeclare it later if we, through the course of writing, decide to change it again.
Yeah.
I'm conscious we've only got a few minutes, but just a suggestion again from Seagoat. And then someone else has suggested maybe a handful of one-liners with hints or options for the crew. So certainly something to think about.
Yeah, I agree, actually.
That people can use.
I'm not writing notes. No, I agree with that one. Was there an actual question there?
No, just a suggestion.
I would like to say something before we tie off, and that's to specifically address Roderick and ask if you were to take the document as it currently stands, obviously not with all the extra additions we intend to throw on top of it, but as it currently stands, and add the clerk. The clerkle. How would you do that?
So you know the wee bit of fluff I wrote.
Yes.
I would put that in the bit where, or something much briefer than that, maybe just like a very abbreviated version of that in when you're just about to explain how to do the number system. I would keep it all in this appendix that you've already got, the NPC appendix, and I would keep the inline text to be as it is with adjective descriptions of how tough all the situations and tests are. And at the end, you've almost got like your system for people who want the crunch. And then you would just basically use Clerkel as a way to explain the system. That's all. That's all I was thinking was like, you can say, here is a standard unit. We've called it Clerkel. And then you can have a bit of fun with making all these horrible little people doing little sketches of them. I had in my head, like the idea of, you get like numbers drawn made of people. So you had like, if there's a rating of 1 in the Clerkel scale, it's one dirty little Clerkel like digging an improvised grave. And if it's a rating of 3, you've got 3 little Clerkels like climbing on top of each other to break into a window, and so on. And then just basically use the Clerkel as a way to illustrate the relative strength. But that was me getting a little bit wild with it.
Well,
but,
you could almost go like that 10 Little Indians poem with it, or something like that. The how they all met their demise, or like an Edward Gorey kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
just
think
essentially it's a tool. Yeah.
We've run out of time to address the question further on what is a clerkel. It is a standard unit
It's a standard
of threat.
unit.
Yeah.
Yeah, standard unit of competence maybe as well.
Yeah.
Standard unit of NPC competence.
And if you want to know more, I would suggest drop into Discord and the conversation can continue there. Just right, what is a Clerkel? WTF? And hopefully that will turn into an answer.
Well, thank you very much to everyone. Thank you to my fellow Rooks, but an extra special thank you to Roderick.
Yay.
And a little cheer. Yay!
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to be here. And I want to say to all the audience, make sure you volunteer and get yourselves up here as well. Don't just be a wallflower.
Yes,
because I didn't
me.
think I had anything great to say either, but they still brought me in. So just
and
get
we've
involved.
given him a 5-star rating.
100%.
Thoroughly appreciate it.
Definitely. Yeah.
Cheers, folks.
Brilliant. Cheers. Speak to you all next week.
All right.
Bye all.
Bye, everyone.
Well.